Oh my. This could be trouble right here. I think I'll do like Jody and I'm going to move the microphone back there in the back. Next week I'll be teaching on Wednesday night. I'll get again, hopefully, and it'll be on Esther. Esther will be the lesson in our books. Which is on page 33, I think. 32. Lesson 6. Esther, courage when it counts, next week. This week is the lesson right before that one on Josiah. I think he brings up some good points in this lesson. The lesson is entitled, Josiah, Let's Go Back to the Book. Just before we read a little bit, we're not going to read all that much, but someone tell me something about Josiah, just quickly. Tell me something about it. One thing. Youngest king to ever serve. So how old was he? 8. You know, to me, and I was talking to Roger last week about an 8-year-old king. And really, before he started doing the Lord's work, about how many years did that take, you recall? About 8 years, it says. And then he started doing what? Getting rid of all the idols and things. So we know his father was wicked, and his grandfather was wicked, and I guess most of the kings before him were wicked. And he was the king of Judah. Now, they should not have been wicked. They should have known the Lord and what the Lord had done in times past. But the thing is, kings had all the power in that area. Kings were kings in that day. And in the next week's lesson, we're going to learn why people were sort of afraid of kings and were receptive to whatever the king said. And if the king liked having fun and parties and all these things, they didn't argue. Not to get too far ahead, but Esther had some fear in her mind when she went before the king to ask him to save her people. And the reason was the king had the power to have her eliminated. So having an 8-year-old king, now they had had some young ones, but 8 years old. When Sam, my son, married his wife, she had an 8-year-old. 8 years old. And imagine him as being king. Now he was a good kid and still is. But unless he had strict controls on him or he had good teaching, an 8-year-old wouldn't know exactly what to do to rule the kingdom. I think God has something to do with this also, certainly. Do you recall anyone who was younger than that actually, who was raised by someone who taught him the truth? Moses. Moses, of course, was in the river in the basket, and King Pharaoh's daughter found him and needed a nurse. You recall that story, and how his mother actually raised him. So good advice and good people around you can accomplish quite a bit. What was one of the problems that Solomon had in his kingdom, in his rulings, and in doing what the Lord wanted him to do? His wives. His wives took him away. He was not to do that, but we know that he involved himself in whatever he wanted. He wanted to find out what would please man as he lived on this life, in this life. And he did a lot of things that he shouldn't have done. But he did come up with the right conclusion, I think, is to fear God and keep his commandments. All is vanity in this life. But in the life to come, if we live right and do what's right, then we have that home in heaven, the promises that have been given to us. Josiah being 8 years old, to me, he had to have some good advice, don't you think? Now, he had a rich kingdom, and I don't know how many advisors. Does anyone have any idea how many people worked for a king in those days? How many?
I'm saying hundreds, probably.
Yeah, I would say hundreds. Right. I noticed in some of the reading there, they had people that were in charge of costumes. I don't know if you read that readings. As you read through about Josiah in 2 Kings 22, 23, I think. And then in 2 Chronicles 34 and 35, basically is where the lesson is taken from. It doesn't really talk about what happened the first 8 years of his reign. But he was king, so he was in charge. And he came to reign after his father and grandfather were evil and did evil in the sight of God. And what does the scripture? Yes, Stephen?
When you say that, Manasseh was his grandfather, right? And
Yes.
he did repent and make some changes. So, I mean, when you talk about maybe who was guiding him, we're assuming his father was early 20s when he died.
Yeah, he died.
So maybe those people learned from when Manasseh did repent. Maybe logically that there was something that Saul that they did, so they could teach him. There had to be somebody who believed. So Manasseh did, for a while repent.
Yes, he did.
He was an evil king, obviously that's what it said, but he did, make some changes. So maybe that was part of it.
As the lesson says, maybe he did some reforming instead of what?
Restoration.
The what? Restoring, right. And I think he makes some good points about the difference between reforming and restoring. Can you give me an example that maybe he gave here about the difference in restoring and reforming?
Reforming is just changing things, and restoring is putting them back like they were.
Reforming is just changing things, and restoring it is making it things like it was.
You can kind of look at the Reformation movement as opposed to the Restoration movement.
What happened in the Reformation movement?
That was reforming the Catholic Church.
Can you name somebody who was a reformer?
Martin Luther.
To me, he's one of the major ones who reformed. The 90 Theses on the wall, on the door. And he tried to reform the Catholic Church. And then there's a movement called what? Restoration. What occurred in that particular time? I don't think any of us were alive, although Kevin would probably have you believe I was there, but I wasn't. This would be in the 1800s.
Instead of reforming, going back to what the Bible said, and starting with that, like the early Christians did.
Right.
And then having a church or worship according to it, and not trying to change what was there. Start over.
In the Reformation movement, there were some things that people noticed that they didn't like about the Catholic Church, that according to Scripture, they had some good reason for the reforming. However, they should have done similar to what Josiah did when he was king and destroyed everything that was evil that he could and start from scratch again and restore things back like they were. Don?
Well, I want to say that Josiah would be 8 years old. Don't you think God had something to do with it, and then his parents and maybe other teachers, but 8 years old to be a king is something else. I've never heard of I've studied, but 8 years old, that is kind of young to be a king, though.
Yep, God was with him, I'm sure, but one thing about that, he was with God.
Yeah, he was with God, I think, and God was in his life, and God gave him people that was around him to teach him more as he grew up. From the time he 4
took the kingship by surprise. His father was killed, as I remember, wasn't he? He was murdered. And so he became king that way. But he had to have people who taught him the truth about God. And there were still some that were faithful. And Manasseh did assist in that, his grandfather, I'm sure. But if there had been evil people throughout his reign, or that were teaching him and trying to help him do what was right, he probably wouldn't have had the attitude that he did. Let's just have, as a beginning place, read in 2 Kings, the 22nd chapter, and go ahead and read through verse 7, 1 through 7. Tom, can you get that for me? You're in the back there, and maybe your voice can be heard.
What was the passage again?
Chapter 22, 2 Kings, 1 through 7.
Okay. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jedidah, the daughter of Adaiah of Bozkath. And he did right in the sight of the Lord, and walked in all the way of his father David, nor did he turn aside to the right or to the left. Now it came about in the 18th year of King Josiah that the king sent Shaphan, the son of Azaliah, the son of Meshullam the scribe, to the house of the Lord, saying, Go up to Hilkiah the high priest, that he may count the money brought into the house of the Lord, which the doorkeepers have gathered from the people. And let them deliver it into the hand of the workmen who have the oversight of the house of the Lord, and let them give it to the workmen who are in the house of the Lord to repair the damages of the house, to the carpenters and to the builders and the masons, and for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the house. Only no accounting shall be made with them for the money delivered into their hands, for they deal faithfully.
Okay, we can learn a lesson from that first verse. What did Josiah do? As he walked along the pathway of righteousness, he didn't do what?
He did not turn aside to the right or to the left.
He didn't go to the right or the left. He stayed on the path as best he could. We know at the end of his life, he made a mistake and went to battle against someone he should not have. Ended up getting an arrow, dying.
You know, there in the first part of verse 2 there of chapter 22, he did right in the sight of the Lord. Somebody taught him.
Right. Somebody had to teach him that.
Yeah, he was well taught to be able to do the things he did and to have that conviction.
Well, what condition was the temple in, or what condition were the people in? The temple was, they didn't even have the law. We know if we read the next few verses in that chapter, what happened? The high priest did what? Finally, as they were looking and getting ready to repair the temple, what did they find?
He found the book of the law.
The book of the law was lost. Now it was in the temple somewhere. But how in the world could a people serve God without having the law available to them? You know, we're very fortunate to have the scriptures as we have it, that we have the account of Josiah and what he did, what he had to go through. But the reason he did that is because the people did go to the right and did go to the left, because they didn't follow the law. Maybe they didn't know what it was, but they varied from it. And they did a lot of things. The condition of the temple was terrible. When you can't find the books of the law, there's been a lot of neglect. And what was going to be the result of that? Destruction and captivity. Did Josiah's righteousness prevent that from happening? No. But what did it prevent? It delayed it. It prevented it from happening as soon as it would have had he not been faithful. The example that I read in here is the reforming or redoing a house. When somebody just remodels a house, they take a few things down, like my cat took the blinds down or the curtains down this afternoon. Boom! So I've done a little remodeling. But I'm not going to restore it. I've already got permission from Lynette and Dorinda to leave the blind or to leave the curtains down. So I'll just have the blinds there. Better, that's in style now. But if you redo a house, remodel a house, that's not restoring it. And I met my mind while it was somewhere else, but in Washington, D.C., you can see a lot of restorations as far as the buildings and the things that are there for the United States citizens and visitors to see and to visit. And they are restored. They're just about like they were in the beginning. If we remodel things, I could put some curtains back up there. They may not be quite like Mother had them in there in the house. But I could do some changing if I'm just remodeling. But if I wanted to restore it like it was, I'd have to get some of those lacy curtains. And the manly man that I am, the lacy curtains, they just don't go anyway. So, but if you restore something, you want to go, and the lesson our title of the lesson said, let's go back to the book. What had they not done in a long, long time? They haven't had the law, but what had they not done also?
Kept the feast. They hadn't kept the feast.
They hadn't kept the feast of the Passover. What was entailed in that? What was the purpose of the feast of the Passover?
To remember what God had done for them.
To remember what God had done for them. And they hadn't done that in a long period of time. You don't remember what extent Josiah did to have them do that again?
Give them animals? Did he?
About how many animals? 30,000, wasn't it? Of his own. So they could kill the lamb or whatever they were able to sacrifice and put on the blood on the doorpost. That's remembering when they left Egypt. Josiah gave of his own flocks. What did Josiah do when the high priest found the book? He had it read to him some, but he tore his clothes when he realized what it was. He tore his clothes, became afraid, wanted to find out what was going to happen. He went and asked a prophetess. I don't remember her name. What's her name?
Huldah.
Yeah, that's probably why I didn't remember it. But he went and found out what was going to occur. And what was going to happen. What was the answer he got from the prophets?
Restore or else.
It's going to happen. He was angry. Now he said it's not going to happen to you because it says he was of tender what? Tender heart. And he was what? Humble. Tender of heart and humble. There are lots of lessons we can gain from this, and one of the things, or two of the things, is we ought to have a tender heart. And we ought to be humble too. And in those days, it was probably not the thing to be humble if you're a king. But he had a tender heart. He loved God. And he loved the people who served him. And he loved his own self. And when he realized what condition the people were in and what was going to happen, he regretted it. He was happy to find the book. And he was happy to repair the temple of God. So much so they gave the money and they didn't even have to account for it because he had confidence in those carpenters and in those workers who did all the wonderful work to restore the temple. But he wanted the people to go back to the book. They needed the book. They needed to know what God's will is. And so we are fortunate now, I think, because of those preachers that went before us. Not that they were inspired, but they stood for the truth and they wanted to go back to the Bible. And it's not a good thing to be in a situation where you have to go back to the Bible. We should be in the Bible. We should stay in it. We should keep things as they are, as God's will was given to us, and not try to change it. We should not go to the right, we should not go to the left. Jesus taught that there is a way that seemeth right, the Old Testament right, there's a way that seems right, but at the end thereof are the ways of destruction. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said what? There's how many ways? There's a narrow way, then there's the wide way. And so it may be difficult sometimes for us to walk that straight and narrow. And we'll vary, if not careful, from the right or to the left. But the thing is, we want to stay in that narrow way. We don't want to vary. We don't want to get off the road and have to have the master come and put us on his back and carry us back to the flock. But if we need that, if we need to be carried, if we need to be assisted, and we happen to be that one who's gone astray, we need to get back on the right road and accept Christ and accept his will and accept his sacrifice for us. So Josiah, though he was young, it took him years, then he wanted to do what was right. Restoration, Josiah's commitment to God was greater than his loyalty to any man. Let's read the first 13 verses of Chronicles, 2 Chronicles 34. His personal commitment to God, as the book describes it. Mike, can you read that for me?
Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. He reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in the ways of his father David. And he did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. For in the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. And in the 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of the high places, the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images. They broke down the altars of the Baals in his presence, and the incense altars which were above them he cut down, and the wooden images, the carved images, and the molded images he broke in pieces, and made dust of them, and scattered it on the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. He also burned the bones of the priests on their altars, and cleansed Judah and Jerusalem. And so he did in the cities of Manasseh, Ephraim, and Simeon, as far as Naphtali, and all around with axes. When he had broken down the altars and the wooden images, had beaten the carved images into powder, and cut down all the incense altars throughout all the land of Israel, he returned to Jerusalem.
Just a minute before you read that last part about the book. That is a pretty bad state when all those things had occurred under the kings of Judah. Ashtaroth, Baal worship, and they went so far as to have places where something terrible happened. You recall? They Molech, right? They burned their children as a sacrifice. And it wasn't a sacrifice to God, although they may have interpreted it as that. Some terrible things. So Josiah made sure that those things were destroyed. He even went so far as to take the bones out of the places where they had been buried and crushed them to powder and removed them from those places. And he tore the things down that were not right. He got rid of them and made it where they could not use them. When you read and understand the condition that those people were in and the things that they had involved involved themselves in and expected God to bless them. You understand why God did not bless them? But God ended up destroying them because they did not serve Him and were not about to serve Him. Some who's understood what the law was did obey. Josiah is an example as a young person, very young person. Go ahead, Mike, if you will. Go ahead and read through verse 13.
In the 18th year of his reign, when he had purged the land and the temple, and he sent Shaphan, the son of Josiah, Messiah, the governor of the city, and Joah, the son of Joahaz, the recorder, to repair the house of the Lord his God. When they came to Hilkiah, the high priest, they delivered the money that was brought into the house of God, which the Levites who kept the doors had gathered from the hand of Manasseh and Ephraim, from all the remnant of Israel, from all Judah and Benjamin, and which they had brought back to Jerusalem. Then they put it in the hand of the foreman, who had the oversight of the house of the Lord. And they gave it to the workmen who worked in the house of the Lord to repair and restore the house. They gave it to the craftsmen and builders to buy hewn stone and timber for beams, and to floor the houses which the kings of Judah had destroyed. And the men did the work faithfully. Their overseers were Japheth and Obadiah, the Levites of the sons of Merachi and Zechariah, and Meshullam of the sons of the Kohathites to supervise. Others of the Levites, all of whom were skillful with instruments of music, were over the burden bearers and were overseers of all who did work in any kind of service. And some of the Levites were scribes, officers, and gatekeepers.
Verse 10 said, and the workmen who were working in the house of the Lord gave it for repairing and restoring the house. This is the temple. Terrible condition. But the men worked faithfully under Josiah's rule.
It kind of reminds you of Ezra and Nehemiah days, when they rebuilt the wall.
They stood, who's going to stand in the gap. They worked feverishly, and they did what they had to
They
do.
had a mind to work.
They had a will to work.
They had a mind to work.
It just shows there were more people than just Josiah that were faithful, that wanted to be faithful.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, those men wouldn't have done it.
There were more people than Josiah. The people, the high priest, I don't know how they could deal with the things that were going on, but the high priest finally found the book. Maybe he had the encouragement to go and look for the truth, look for the book that had been lost. Knew it was there.
Josiah also, I read part of this, and Josiah talked to the elders and Jerusalem and Jerusalem to the temple and read the word of the book of the covenant to them and led them in renewing their covenant with God. And then it's got Chronicles 34, 29 through 33. This includes keeping all common testimony and statements of the Lord, with all their heart and soul. I read this 29. What I'm reading is I'm reading out of this book, and that's what he did for with Jerusalem and everything else.
He went throughout all the land around Jerusalem, even outside of Judah, destroying things and making sure that things that God was displeased with, that they were torn down. They were eliminated. They were pounded and scattered.
That's something for me to go to think that I can get that deep and understand all this now, though, brother. You know what? It makes me feel good that I can even understand it. And I did. I learned something tonight about this young man.
We can all learn something.
You never get too old to learn.
That's right.
How long this
2 years, and then he was
So,
evil, and he was
look
killed.
what he's having, what all he's having, tear down,
It is amazing. If you read all of the things that are written there in a couple of chapters, it is amazing what he had to deal with. And to have his army or his leaders, who are the men, the carpenters, and the people that wanted to restore the temple, not just fix it up where it looked nice, but to restore it as it should be, they were willing to do that. He did a couple of things. I suppose we need to go back and answer some of the questions at the end there. But the thing in verse 12 said the men put in charge of repairing the temple shared Josiah's zeal. So Josiah certainly wasn't the only one. They did the right thing, they did the right work, and they were trustworthy. Of course, they found the book that had been lost. The writer here in the lesson points out that whenever God's word is lost, God's people are destroyed. They don't have the knowledge they need. And people and God's prophets weep and are not happy and sad, and they preach out what God's message is, and yet people will not do it. They'll say peace, peace, when there is no peace. And there is a balm, or there was a balm in Gilead. There is salve. There is a great Redeemer. There is a great physician. But people need to obey what the law is.
It was well into the 10th year of Josiah's reign before they ever found the book.
That's right. 10 years before they found the book in Josiah's reign. He was 18. But they knew what it was. And they didn't just throw it aside. And that saved Josiah. And that saved the people for a period of time. But those that were guilty of not following God's will and doing sin for so long, eventually he caught up with it. And it was a terrible thing. Okay, when the book was read, he was sad. He rent his clothes. This was a gesture of intense and sudden sorrow and grief. He was ashamed of the nation's sin and afraid of the wrath of God. Let's see. Let's just go ahead and we'll answer some of these questions. I'm not sure, since nobody knew what we were studying tonight, except Roger. Roger asked me. So, Roger, you can answer all these questions tonight. Next week, though, is Esther. Try to answer those questions, and I guess we may have a book or two. Yeah, we got some books up here if you need one for next week. This podium is about a foot further down than it needs to be for my contacts to focus properly. So, number one, Jeff, how old was Josiah when he became king? 8. Excellent. All right, here's one you may not know, though. How long did he reign?
31 years.
How many?
31.
That's right, 31 years. We've got 5 minutes. I'm going to skip over that. Apostasy. What does apostasy mean? It said consult a dictionary. What is apostasy?
The act of abandoning what one has believed.
That is absolutely what I have written down here. The abandonment or renunciation of a religious belief. And Siri also added political in there. Not past Siri. But it's leaving their person's belief. Why is a commitment to God essential to the work of restoration? Why do we need to restore? If we're gone away from the truth, we need to be restored.
If you try to restore, if you try to remodel, you're gonna miss
If you try to remodel, you can do what you pretty well want to.
Yeah, but if you restore, you're taking it going back to what it was supposed to.
That's right. And that was Josiah's plan, is to restore the temple and to restore the feasts and the sacrifices that needed to be made. And that should be our idea.
If the Lord's not involved in that, if you don't let the Lord get involved in that, you may think you're restoring, you may be reforming.
That's right. If you don't have God's plan before you, you don't have the book open, you could vary, thinking you may be doing what's right, but you may not be doing what's right. And Josiah made sure, through the reading of the book and having it there now, he tried to do what was right and destroy all the things and all throughout the land. Josiah's commitment to God led him to be involved in what? Two works in the lesson.
Learning the land of idolatry and repairing the temple.
Absolutely. The idolatry things were torn down and repairing the temple, restoring it. Why were Josiah's reforms different from his grandfather's? His grandfather Manasseh, we talked about it, did some good things. He didn't restore it.
Josiah didn't spiritual left or right.
Right. He didn't go to the left or to the right, and he restored things as they should be. What did Josiah do at the altar of Bethel? 2 Kings 23, 15 through 20. I think it may in verse 20. He broke it down. I have written down here. He burned it. He crushed it to powder. And he burned the wooden images. What was discovered in the temple that was while it was being repaired?
Book of the law.
The book of the law. And I don't know exactly what book that was. I don't know if it was this gentleman here who wrote this, that he thought it was the book of Deuteronomy. But it was a book that had God's law and God's will in it. How did God respond to Josiah's repentance? He what? Favorably. What two things did he say about him? Said he had a what? Pure heart, a tender heart. He was humble. Humble. When did Josiah die?
He didn't listen to what God had, I guess, told the other king that was coming in to destroy him.
Pharaoh Necho was coming in to fight a battle, and Josiah wanted to go and meet him in battle. And that was not God's plan. And he went in battle. Seems like I read that he went, maybe it's not him, but he went in disguise, and an arrow got him. He got hit with an arrow, and he died. I'm not sure about the disguise part. I read something, and maybe it was something else. I had to look at his oral or something. All right, we talked about the difference in remodeling and restoring. Next week, Esther, we do it.